Statseeker version 5.5.3 introduces a new dashboard panel, the image map. The image map panel allows you to import an image as a backdrop and to then overlay nodes on that image, with each node configured to report a monitored metric or state. Here are examples of a simple office network, a floor plan highlighting offline security cameras, and here we have a single panel acting like a series of single stat panels to present a basic inventory. Let's have a look at putting one together. I'll create a new dashboard, add an image map panel, and jump into edit mode. We could begin with defining our queries to specify the data that we want displayed, but I'm going to begin by dropping in my background image, so I'll head off to the image map tab. We can see that there are two options for the image type. External image, if you have access to something hosted, you can just drop in a URL. Or an uploaded image. So the resource will be stored locally on the Statseeker server. Here are a few that I've previously uploaded to the server. I can also just upload a new image. Now, there are a few points to keep in mind with regard to the images that you'll be using. The first is that you can only position nodes on the image itself. There's no space within the panel that sits outside of the image. If we have a look at this panel here, you can see I've added a border around the image. And if I attempt to drag one of the nodes off that image into the space around it, they snap back onto the image. Here's another version of the panel where I've adjusted the background image to include additional white space. This allows me to position nodes within that area. Another item to consider is that the panel only supports configuration of the nodes that you'll be overlaying on top of the image. In this version of the panel, if you want to display links between nodes or objects, and maybe assign a metric to that link, then these links need to be included as part of the image like we have here. You can't add them from within the panel configuration. And lastly, as always, you can scale a large image down to suit, but you can't scale a small image up. Okay, so I'm going to run with this section of the London office. Let's add our metrics. Back to the metrics tab. We need to add a query for each metric that we want to show on the map. I want the current device state. So device, I'll use a group filter to limit the query to the devices in the office. Event fields, ping state, state. I also want to see CPU load for the devices, so I'll add another query, device health, CPU. Add our group filter, and the field I want is CPU load, and I want the current CPU load. And I'm going to aggregate that across the device. I don't care if a single core is under load, I care if the device is under load. Now I also want to drop in a label. In the previous query for ping state, that'll return something like device A is up, device B is down. But this query is returning data on a CPU, so I'll get CPU 1 load is 60% or CPU 2 is 65. And I've got no idea what device they're going to belong to. But actually in this query, we're aggregating the CPU load across the device. That will return something like query B, record 1 is 60%, query B, record 2 is 65. So instead we drop in a label, and that'll be referenced to identify the entities that we're reporting on. Let's also drop in a query for device temperature, configured just like the previous queries. Group filter, field, and label. And lastly, a query for link utilization. Add the group filter. Let's get both inbound and outbound utilization. Drop in the label, device name and interface title. And I'm only going to be displaying a few of the primary links, so I can just drop in a filter to discard the others. In this case, on my network, primary links have a title of link to something. Okay, so we have ping state, CPU load, temperature, and link utilization. Let's add the nodes. Back in the image map tab, add node. Okay, so which query is the node from? Let's do our ping state. Which device is it for? Select your metric. Now this query only returns the one. And I'm going to add colouring to highlight down devices. So I'll set up to green, specify an alternate for when the device is down. I'll view the panel so we can see what we have a little more clearly. Here's our node. I'll position it where I want it. Now I'm using the node colour to indicate the state, so I don't really need to display the state. Back in Edit, I can turn that metric off. So I have the node configured the way I want it. I've got other devices that I also want to display the same device state node for. So I can just duplicate the node and update the entity and repeat the process for a few more, and we'll position them. Okay, let's get on to our CPU nodes. Add node, select my CPU query, choose the entity, select the metric and specify the units, and specify the colouring. Same process, duplicate the node, updating the entity, and then position them. Now that I have them positioned pretty much where I want them, I'm going to update the label to identify the metric. And if I'd done that first, I wouldn't have known which device they belong to. I can leave it actually displaying the metric if I want, or hide it and just use the colouring. Exactly the same process for the temperature nodes. And now the utilization nodes. Query, entity, metric, units, colouring. Duplicate for the outbound, updating the metric, and then you can duplicate both nodes for each of the other links. Position them, and then update the labels for display. Now you can also assign a link to the node, drilling down to the device overview dashboard or a custom report or anything that's going to work for you. But be aware, when you're repositioning nodes that have links assigned to them, you'll need to hold down the control key on the keyboard when you move the node. Otherwise, when you release the mouse button, it'll trigger the link. And that's a quick look at configuring your image map panels, available in Statseeker version 5.5.3.